CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The UK's cabinet meets with scientists to consider introducing further restrictions in the face of rising numbers of COVID cases.
Our other headlines: empty chairs at empty tables. Christmas cancellations begin to bite as the hospitality industry pleads for financial help.
The trial of the British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell. Lawyers make their closing arguments on child sex trafficking charges against her.
And Chile elects its youngest ever president. Gabriel Boric defeats the far-right candidate in a resounding victory.
The UK Cabinet is meeting to consider introducing further restrictions to avoid hospitals becoming overwhelmed over Christmas and to try to contain spiralling cases of the Omicron COVID variant.
But many in the ruling Conservative Party are opposed to any new measures. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Guy Henderson in London. Guy, this meeting's still going on. What are the options the government is looking at?
Yeah, the meeting's still going on, Jamie, but the Telegraph newspaper in the last few minutes has just broken some news, apparently from that meeting, saying that Boris Johnson is unlikely to introduce new COVID restrictions before Christmas. Now, what we understand is that the Prime Minister was presented, or his cabinet were presented with three options by their scientific advisors during this cabinet meeting. The first was for him to come out of that meeting and issue guidance, just advising people to limit their social mixing with family and friends over Christmas. The second two both involve bringing in more stringent mandatory measures, so either compelling people to limit their social mixing and a curfew perhaps for hospitality venues, or the harsher option, another national lockdown. Now, those last two would have involved a vote in Parliament. It would have involved bringing back Parliament before Christmas, something that would not perhaps have been too popular amongst many MPs, and could have also been politically quite complicated for the Prime Minister as well. Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, had been on the television earlier in the day saying that he didn't foresee that happening, and that then was leaning popular opinion already towards the idea that perhaps we might see the weaker of the first of those three options, i.e. Just some guidance of some sort. That Telegraph report perhaps suggesting we may not even see that. But at the moment, those are just unconfirmed reports, and that cabinet meeting is ongoing.
Guy, hospital doctors and nurses saying they're already struggling with COVID, but hospitality industries are warning of bankruptcy because of the drop-off in numbers. Boris Johnson really is stuck between a rock and a hard place on this, isn't he?
Yeah, you've got doctors complaining of staff shortages in hospitals just at the time when they need staff to be ready to go as cases are going up so sharply. Teachers are being urged to come back from retirement in the early stages of next year in anticipation that there'll be significant staff shortages as cases continue to rise. We've just heard a little bit of other breaking news. The Premier League has decided to continue with its Christmas fixtures through the festive period, despite the fact that there's been a rising number of cases amongst Premiership players and staff over the course of the last few weeks as well. Ministers, despite all of this growing disruption, many of them, and senior ministers as well, appear to still view the idea of stronger restrictions as even more disruptive, and they, from what we understand, have quite stringently or fiercely opposed the idea of bringing in those stricter measures during these discussions, despite what government scientists are telling them. They worry about the impact it could have on the economy. They worry about the impact it could have on society after so many months of coming in and out of lockdowns. They want to wait, they had said, until more data became clear, but until the government had access to more data, not just on the case numbers, but also a better idea of how many people are actually getting seriously sick and even dying as a result of the spread of the Omicron variant in a population, of course, where vaccine take-up has been very high. Those reports, again, from the Telegraph suggesting that those ministers may have won the day out of that cabinet meeting, but we'll have to see what emerges from it, from the government ministers themselves.
Guy, we might come back to you if we get an outcome on those deliberations on further UK lockdowns. But for the moment, Guy Henderson, our correspondent in London, thank you very much.
It's being described as lockdown by stealth, as the UK government's COVID warnings are keeping shoppers at bay. There was a substantial decline in high street shopping in the UK over the weekend, the last before Christmas.
And in the hospitality sector, businesses have collapsed as millions of people simply cancel meals, parties and other festive gatherings. Kitty Logan reports.
It's meant to be the busiest time of the year for pubs, bars and restaurants in England. But as COVID cases surge, the country's chief medical officer has warned against mixing with friends before Christmas. Many are taking that advice and changing their plans.
To effectively say to people, you know, we recommend you don't go out, you don't socialise, you don't go to the pub, and don't go for meals. That has decimated trade in pubs as well as restaurants. And yet the government hasn't provided any support.
The British Beer and Pub Association says there were 3 million cancelled bookings in the second week of December alone, causing huge losses. Pubs and restaurants can make up to a quarter of their annual profits in the run-up to Christmas alone. So for many, it may already be too late to make up for the losses of recent days. With people again told to work from home, London is especially hard hit. Some pubs are shutting their doors. The pub chain Green King says some of its London sales are down by 70%. This high-end restaurant is suffering too. It's toughed out the pandemic so far, but this crisis during the crucial Christmas period is a bitter blow.
If hospitality is a problem, then they should close us and they should bring back furlough or financial support. Otherwise, they've got to let us trade as normal.
But after an initial drop in bookings, there's been a turnaround in trade here, as people head for the heated and festive outdoor space.
We've seen a lot of people who have phoned up and said, can we move our booking from inside to outside? So, you know, they are nervous. And I think people want to be confident of, you know, airflow, space between tables.
Some are continuing to celebrate in pubs. Hospitality firms are hoping consumer confidence could recover.
So we hope that we will see people who feel able to go to the pub to support their local pubs throughout December, throughout Christmas. And we certainly hope we won't be seeing further restrictions.
But with scientists calling for stronger measures to curb the rapid spread of the Omicron variant, hospitality is likely to pay the highest price for any new restrictions. Kitty Logan, CGTN, London.
Well, restaurateurs have warned that hospitality firms need support in the next 24 hours as venues prepare to shut their doors in the face of dwindling customer numbers. Let's talk to UK Hospitality Chief Executive Kate Nichols. Kate, this government cabinet meeting is still going on. It's 2.5 hours now. I mean, it looks like the lockdown supporters have not carried the day. They're looking to find some more data. That's certainly when we're trying to get word, but that's certainly what's coming out of the meeting. Possibly a circuit breaker from the 28th before New Year. It looks like you're going to be staying open.
Well, for many of our businesses, they will be staying open in name only. They are seeing very significant drops in trade, and that continued threat of a circuit breaker over the New Year period and into January certainly causing a great deal of anxiety amongst many of our businesses. But it is positive news that we are allowed to remain open. that restrictions on hospitality are kept to a minimum, and that while businesses are struggling, they are still able to fulfil the bookings for those people who do want to go out, and that we can continue to provide a very safe place for people to socialise safely with family and friends.
What will happen to pubs and restaurants without further government support?
Well, what we're seeing at the moment over the course of December, and it has been a rapidly deteriorating situation day by day over the last week, we've seen 50% of bookings cancelled and a drop in revenue of 40 to 60% on what would have been expected at this time of year. So those are significant losses for those businesses to bear. They push them down into loss making. That means that businesses are having to run using up their cash reserves again, and they're having to pay staff, suppliers, rent and rates bills without any significant revenue coming in. So unless we can get business support from the government to those businesses most acutely affected, then we are likely to see several of them at risk come the new year, when trade tones down. In any case, January and February are our loss-making months, and they're very quiet. So it's imperative we get support to these businesses to compensate them for the loss of this period of time. These are not just normal trading weeks. These are our most profitable trading weeks that are vital to secure the viability and future of many businesses.
And that's why it's not just about this Christmas period, is it? Talk to me about how worried you are about potential loss of consumer confidence on leisure and hospitality into the new year, beyond January and February, which are traditionally slower months.
Well, I think we're already seeing the impact of a crashing of consumer confidence. There is a mismatch between the political policy statements about what restrictions are in place, which are at the moment light touch and minimal, and the economic reality being faced by our members. Consumers are literally voting with their feet. They are cancelling bookings. They are taking to heart the advice about prioritising socialising. And we're seeing that in the takings that our members are making, and in the reduced numbers of bookings and cancellations that we're seeing. And we're really worried that the longer this uncertainty hangs over the sector, the fact that there might be restrictions, there might be closures, there might be lockdowns in the new year, that just deteriorates and erodes consumer confidence even more, and it leads people to cancel their bookings in January, February, and even into the Easter period, the start of our summer season. That's why we're asking government to make sure that the industry is supported throughout that period. Otherwise, you will find that people pretty rapidly run out of road and won't be able to reopen their businesses.
You're talking about this uncertainty, lots of mights, lots of maybes. So what kind of planning would you like to see for the future? Maybe the sort of furlough like they have in Germany, that's there all the time and not just in times of crises?
Well, I think that is the big difference between what is happening in the UK and what is happening in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, the support mechanisms are there in the background as much as they are needed, whether that is furlough or alternatively a grant to the business to reflect the loss of revenue, the loss of profits that they are sustaining, and to cover a proportion of their overheads. That means those businesses can weather the storms of changes in trade that come about not just as a result of government policy, but as a result of changes in consumer confidence. We'd like to see a similar kind of mechanism available in the UK, emergency cash grants to get people through and enable them to pay staff. We'd like to see a cancellation of business rates, so the property taxes that are due to come in January that need to be paid, and then longer term, giving us again, in keeping with the rest of the European Union, a lower rate of VAT so that we can attract back our international travellers and keep the rate of tax on holiday accommodation, eating and drinking out as low as practically possible. But crucially, what we also want from the government is a clear line of sight going forward, a commitment to a period of calm, so we don't have this endless speculation about what restrictions might be happening, what people might or might not be able to do in a week's time. We need to have a period of time and a clear commitment to a review of restrictions on the 5th of January and next steps to be taken then when Parliament has returned, rather than this endless speculation which just damages consumer confidence and business confidence.
That's a long and well thought through wish list. Kate Nichols from UK Hospitality, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's the picture in the UK. In Germany, they're reporting to be planning to limit private gatherings to groups of 10 people who've either been vaccinated or recovered from COVID from the 28th of December. This all comes amid concern about the Omicron variant. A draft statement is reported to say the restrictions will be the same for indoor and outdoor gatherings, although children under the age of 14 will be exempt.
Doctors in France are warning hospitals are close to paralysis due to a rush of COVID-19 cases, 80% of which are non-vaccinated patients. The Association of Emergency Medicine warns France is struggling with a fifth wave of the virus before an expected sixth wave of the Omicron variant hits. The group supports mandatory vaccines to stop the healthcare system becoming overwhelmed.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the EU adds a fifth COVID vaccine to its arsenal, just as cases rise again.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cole. What's on your agenda this week? I know when it comes to news, you're sport for choice. So many channels, so many opinions. But it's time to step off the news roundabout, time to cut out the noise, get to the heart of the real story with a talk show with a difference. I'll be finding out what the world is thinking by talking to the global decision makers and helping you set your own news agenda. Remember, we don't just report the news, we set the agenda.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. YouTube and Daily Motion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, on Freeview.
The European Union's drug regulator has approved the use of the Novovax COVID vaccine for people over the age of 18. The European Medicines Agency said the jab's efficacy was around 90%, but there was limited data about how well it fared against Omicron and other variants. It'll be the fifth vaccine available in the EU. The United States company Novovax said it should start shipping to the EU in January. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Benji Hire in Brussels. Benji, does the EU need a fifth vaccine at this stage in the pandemic?
Look, it's a good question, considering already we have distributions of Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna and the AstraZeneca vaccine. So you could be saying, well, this is all a little, too late. What's the point in having a fifth? The argument in favour is because of the situation that the European Union finds itself in now, with rising cases of Omicron and indeed the potential for shutdowns in different countries. Obviously, a vaccine can't prevent all transmission of the virus, but scientists claim it could help reduce the severity of symptoms, and that could help ease the pressure on hospitals going forward. And this vaccine could simply add to the arsenal of the existing vaccines going forward. There is obviously the argument on the other side, which is that there are many different countries around the world that require vaccines. One of the reasons that we've in fact seen these new emerging variants is because not enough developing nations have been able to get their hands on jabs, and therefore if the EU continues to take hundreds of millions of them, what about the availability for other nations around the world?
And presumably there's a pretty advanced deal in place for delivery over the coming months and perhaps even years.
That's right. In fact, even before the European Medical Agency approved the vaccine, the EU had already pledged, on the condition of that approval, 100 million doses, with 100 million doses subsequent to that if needed. Essentially, this is about getting ready for years down the line. This virus is not going to just be eliminated overnight, and therefore there's got to be the potential for boosters in the months and indeed years to come. The benefit of this particular vaccine versus the others is the fact that it doesn't need to be stored at dramatically low temperatures, meaning it can be delivered and moved around the continent much easier. And the way it works is slightly different to other vaccines too. It kind of creates a copy of the protein in order for the body to recognise COVID-19. Without going too much into the scientific explanation, what Novovax hopes is that this will kind of try to convince those who are more sceptical of getting the vaccine. They didn't want to have this injected inside of them because it contained COVID or another sort of virus. This is different to all the other vaccines in that sense, and potentially will therefore relieve some of the hesitation that has forced some people not to take this vaccine.
Benji, where have they been till now? We're all familiar with AstraZeneca and Pfizer and Moderna, all the rest of it. Is this too little too late for this company that wasn't exactly quick off the mark, was it? Or perhaps its late arrival means it'll make a fortune now?
Quite a bit behind the competitors, you'd have to admit. A lot of that down to sort of production delays and the fact that this is a much smaller company, and there are fears and the concerns that this will not be able to match the demands that had been put in place by the European Union. Novavax's CEO, it should be mentioned, is optimistic. He argues that this company's vaccine will help overcome a lot of the barriers that still exist. I talked about sort of distribution of the vaccine, for instance, and also vaccine hesitancy. So he's confident that this firm does have a role to play, in addition to the fact that the results from the clinical trials are indeed very positive. Then there's one kind of game changer to end on here, which is how much this vaccine will help against the Omicron variant in particular. If this comes, if information comes through that shows it is very efficient against this new strain, then that could be something that projects that company forward and means that many other countries, not just the EU and countries in that bloc, try to get their hands on this particular vaccine.
Benji, thanks for that. Benji High, our correspondent in Brussels.
The United States Senate will vote on President Joe Biden's $1.75 trillion Build Back Better plan, despite opposition from a key Democratic senator. Joe Manchin told Fox News that he would not vote for the investment bill, saying more debt would drastically hinder the country's ability to respond to threats. Leading Democrats say it will be presented to the Senate in January.
The world's richest man and Tesla CEO Elon Musk has said he'll pay more than $11 billion in tax this year, which could be a record amount of money for annual tax paid by a single person. Earlier this year, the electric car entrepreneur was accused of paying zero federal taxes in 2018. He said he would pay the unusually high tax bill this year after the sale of millions of Tesla shares.
Japan's parliament has approved a record extra budget of $317 billion to help the economy cope with the pandemic. It will be spent on vaccines, medicines, promoting tourism and supporting families with children. The government will issue $194 billion worth of bonds to help pay for it.
The Italian luxury fashion group Zegna has gone public on the New York Stock Exchange after merging with a special purpose acquisition company, or what's known as a SPAC, in a $3 billion deal. It's the latest Italian family-owned business, luring investors to fund expansion and compete on the world stage. After the industry was hit hard by COVID, the Zegna family retains a majority stake.
Global merger and acquisition deal-making smashed all-time records in 2021 to top $5 trillion for the first time ever. Cheap financing and sky-high valuations saw volumes rising 63%. Let's talk to Joshua Mahoney, who's a senior market analyst at IG. Good to see you, Joshua. Now, last year, the pace of M&A activity fell to a 3-year low due to the global financial fallout of COVID-19. Is this record, then, due to all the pent-up demand?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent you might be right. Certainly some time has passed since then, and businesses have been able to grow their cash pile to be able to spend. We've got US corporates sitting on around about $2 trillion worth of cash. Now, the expectation here is that businesses that have built up a significant amount of funding are essentially going out and trying to buy growth. They can do so by spending money on dividends to give them back to investors. They can try and lift their share price by doing something like buying another company and buying growth that they might not necessarily be able to achieve as quickly if they were doing it on their own. Now, I would say that there's different types to be looking out for. Around about 45% of the deals done over the course of this year were over in the US. And I think a lot of the US moves have come from a position of strength. In particular, some of those big tech names, and certainly I think private equity names would have been able to benefit from the big gains that they've seen on the tech side of things, and then being able to invest in companies that potentially are deemed to be somewhat undervalued. And it's this sort of uneven recovery that we're seeing across different sectors that I think makes it quite interesting in terms of who's actually being bought out, and are they being bought out from a position of strength or a position of weakness.
You mentioned tech. I know that banking has had quite a look in. Which sectors do you think are smashing it in the M&A realm?
I think that generally you'd look at tech and healthcare as being two areas where you see general strength traditionally through M&A activity. Certainly, if you look at what companies have done very well over the course of the pandemic, you would say it would be tech and healthcare. So we'd probably expect something similar going forward. They're also the kind of areas where you can't necessarily always expect to see those businesses essentially constantly inventing new products. And instead, sometimes they just decide, like I said, to buy in the growth. So I would expect to see a similar kind of move going forward. I mean, you look at what's happened here in the UK, and again, we're talking about people buying companies out of the view that they're potentially undervalued here in the UK. You look at that £7 billion deal for Morrison's. And certainly that is coming off of a view that if you look at the relative valuations between UK supermarkets and US supermarkets, the UK names are undervalued. So that has provided a bit of a boost across the whole sector. But certainly I would say here in the UK, it's a case of companies being deemed to be undervalued. Over in the US, it's perhaps a wider picture of strength, but businesses really wanting to buy in growth.
Do you think there are any signs that this deal flow is going to slow down in 2022?
I wouldn't say so, to be honest. I think businesses are probably going to continue to grow moving forward. If you look at the kinds of levels that we're seeing in terms of consumer savings, I think there is still plenty of money around for businesses when we do see the economy really firing on all cylinders. Of course, we've got question marks around about the Omicron variant and alike, and potential shutdowns, which provide some jitters for businesses. But arguably, as we've seen over the course of the past year, a lot of the time that actually provides the basis for those that do have cash to spot those opportunities and be able to jump in.
Always a chance for grabbing an opportunity. Joshua Mahoney, good to speak to you. Thank you very much.
The jury in the New York trial of the British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell is due to be sent out to consider the child sex trafficking charges against her. The former partner of the late billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted of having sex with underage girls, faces up to 80 years in prison if she's found guilty. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Sarah Walton in New York. Sarah, what's happening today?
Well, the court here in New York hearing closing arguments this morning from both the prosecution and defence teams. And really this is their last chance to set out the main points of their case and make those final appeals to the jury. After that, the judge, Alison Nathan, will give instructions to the jury, reminding them of the legal guidelines that they will have to keep in mind as they make their deliberations. And those deliberations could start as early as this afternoon. And really, we've reached this point in the case much quicker than we were expecting. Originally, it was thought that the trial would last for about 6 weeks, but in the end, we had just 3 weeks of testimony.
And just remind us of the allegations against Maxwell and what her defence have had to say.
Well, Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to 6 charges against her, which include the sex trafficking of minors, sex trafficking of minors, conspiracy and perjury. The prosecution, in the 10 days that they set out their case, they called 4 key witnesses, and they were women, some of whom gave evidence anonymously, women who said that they were sexually abused as minors by Jeffrey Epstein. Now, in their testimony, they said that Maxwell had arranged those encounters with Jeffrey Epstein, and 2 of the women said that Maxwell herself had touched them inappropriately. The defence took just 2 days to set out their case, calling 4 witnesses, including friends and acquaintances of Maxwell, who said that they had seen no evidence of an inappropriate relationship between Maxwell and her accusers. They also called a psychologist who called into question the memories of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged victims because of trauma in the passage of time. Now, Maxwell herself did not give evidence. She told the court on Friday that she did not believe that the prosecution had sufficiently set out the case against her beyond all reasonable doubt, and therefore she felt no need to take the stand herself. Maxwell and her defence team have maintained all through the trial that she is being unfairly scapegoated.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry about that. We seem to have lost our link to New York, and our correspondent Sarah Walton at the trial of the British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell, but I think we got the gist of what she was saying there.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Who shot down flight MH17 over Ukraine? Prosecutors are summing up in their case against 4 men accused of involvement.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the 2nd year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The UK Cabinet is meeting with its scientists as COVID cases surge. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to announce in the next hour whether new restrictions will be introduced.
UK restaurateurs have warned that hospitality firms need support in the next 24 hours as venues prepare to shut their doors in the face of dwindling customer numbers.
And the European Union's drug regulator has approved the use of the Novovax COVID vaccine for people over the age of 18.
Chile has elected its youngest president in its history. 35-year-old left-wing candidate Gabriel Boric has defeated his far-right rival, José Antonio Cast, by a substantial margin. The former student protest leader vowed to tackle inequality and corruption and defend democracy. The victory prompted celebrations on the streets of the capital, Santiago. Official results gave Boric 56% of the vote against 44% for Mr Cast, who conceded defeat within 2 hours of the polls closing. Well, Boric fronts a leftist bloc that's never been in government. Chile has been rocked in recent years by mass demonstrations against inequality and corruption, prompted by one of the world's largest income gaps. Well, let's talk to our correspondent now. Joel Richards is in Santiago. Thanks for coming on the programme. Now, this was a very close race. How surprising is the result?
Juliet, nobody foresaw a landslide victory such as the one we saw last night for Gabriel Boric. As you rightly said, this was a polarised campaign ahead of this second round of voting that we had here in Chile on Sunday, and simply nobody dared, perhaps, but nobody expected to see the kind of result which gave Gabriel Boric a more than 10-point advantage over his rival José Antonio Cast. Boric, 35 years of age, he will be the youngest president in Chilean history, against José Antonio Cast, who was a very different candidate his proposals were very different, and perhaps the best way to consider this race is only in the context of the 2019 protests. José Antonio Cast said he wanted to clamp down on law and order, clamp down on immigration as well. But Gabriel Boric really campaigned on listening to the protests that we saw in 2019 and also building on the current process, which is drafting a new constitution. So, as you said, Gabriel Boric promised to bring in great changes to Chile's economy and listen to voters, and now he certainly has a mandate to do that.
Well, his background is student politics, that grassroots, if you like, but now he's the new president. What's his priority going to be?
Well, he faces a number of challenges, Gabriel Boric. Perhaps the first one really is to unite Chile. In the first round of voting, we saw a very fractured vote, which really represents a very fragmented society. He needs to bring Chileans together. He has a very ambitious social programme. He says he wants to bring in lasting social change, and for that to happen, he is going to have to reach across the aisle. We saw a very divided Congress. He's going to have to make agreements with the opposition and in a very split Congress. And as we said, look to reach across the aisle, reach those agreements, which will perhaps be difficult given that he is campaigning on such a left-wing political platform. He's also going to have to juggle how the markets deal with his presidency and how investors view Chile. Chile, a country that has been long viewed as a model of stability in Latin America, but Boric is certainly looking to change that. So the markets see risk with the Gabriel Boric presidency that starts, by the way, next year in March 2020. Chileans, though, want change, and we saw that in the results last night. So as Gabriel Boric himself last night said, the times ahead will be difficult.
Extraordinary times indeed. Joel Richards in Santiago, thank you very much.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has held talks with his counterparts from Poland and Lithuania as members of the regional alliance, the Lublin Triangle. Zelensky described the leaders as true friends as they offered their support for Ukraine to join the EU and NATO. This all comes amid continuing tension between Kiev and Moscow, with a build-up of Russian troops along the border.
One person's been shot dead and more than 100 injured when security forces dispersed protests in Sudan. Hundreds of thousands of people marched to the presidential palace in Khartoum on Sunday to mark the third anniversary of a popular uprising that ended former President Omar Bashir's rule. The protesters also demanded an end to military involvement in the country's transition to free elections.
90 lawmakers have been elected to Hong Kong's new Legislative Council. It's the first legislative election in the territory since Beijing revamped its electoral process in March. Under the new law, only those deemed as patriots could stand. Hong Kong's leaders say the changes were necessary to safeguard stability. The critics say it curbs democracy. Turnout was slightly above 30%. That's significantly lower than in 2016. China's foreign ministry attributed the low turnout to coronavirus and interference from what were described as anti-China elements.
Malaysian authorities say at least 8 people have been killed by recent flooding. 3 days of heavy rain caused dozens of road closures and disrupted shipping. More than 21,000 people have been displaced from their homes. The rescue teams work to free people trapped by the worst flooding in years.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Weeks before the Beijing Winter Olympics, the excitement is hotting up for China's ice hockey players, young and old.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cole. What's on your agenda this week? I know when it comes to news, you're sport for choice. So many channels, so many opinions. But it's time to step off the news roundabout, time to cut out the noise, get to the heart of the real story with a talk show with a difference. I'll be finding out what the world is thinking by talking to the global decision makers and helping you set your own news agenda. Remember, we don't just report the news, we set the agenda.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back. Dutch prosecutors have begun closing arguments in the trial of 4 men accused of helping shoot down Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over Ukraine in 2014. All 298 passengers were killed. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stefan de Vries, who's watching events in Amsterdam. Stefan, what have prosecutors been saying?
Well, of course, the trial started last year in March after a 5-year-long international investigation into the shooting down of the flight MH17. The Dutch prosecutors think that Russia is behind this assault, so they are now have 3 days to state their closing arguments to the court. Let's have a listen to what one of the prosecutors said this afternoon here in Amsterdam.
At that moment, a warhead from a Buk missile detonated to the left of the cockpit. Shrapnel and missile parts pierced the left of the cockpit, and the accompanying blast did the rest. The fuselage broke into multiple parts and plummeted down. The passengers of flight MH17 didn't stand a chance.
Stefan, the accused men are not actually physically in the court, are they?
No, the suspects are 3 Russian men and 1 Ukrainian man, and one of the 4 only is being represented by legal counsel in Amsterdam today. The other 3 deny any implication, and they refuse to come to the court in the Netherlands. Now, the defendants, they have till March to present their arguments, and then the court will go into recession for a couple of months. It will last until at least September 2022 before we have a final verdict, and that can also be the start for the families of the 298 victims to start closure, because this has been going on for over 7 years now, and the families in the Netherlands, they hope that the truth will finally come to light, and that the suspects will be tried, and well, that they can close actually this very painful memory.
Stefan, thanks for that. Stefan de Vries, our correspondent in Amsterdam.
In the Philippines, the death toll from Typhoon Rai, which battered the country last week, is up to 375.
It's the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year, and it smashed into southern and central parts of the country.
More than 700,000 people were affected. Gretchen Malalad reports from Manila.
We are now seeing a grim picture of the trail of destruction that Typhoon Rai made as it rampaged through parts of the Visayas and Mindanao region Thursday. The death count keeps on climbing despite preparations and evacuations made before the storm hit. Some of the hardest hit areas still has no power and communication lines, so the full assessment of the deaths and damages could happen in the next few days. Houses made of wood along coastal areas were shattered into pieces. Residents who survived the intense winds and massive flooding tried to rummage through the debris to find anything to salvage. Thousands of survivors are in dire need of food, drinking water, and materials to rebuild their homes. There are long lines at water refilling stations, and groceries are already without food. Thousands of military, police, Coast Guard, and fire personnel are being deployed to assist in the search and rescue efforts. The Philippine Coast Guard and Navy have started to dispatch their vessels filled with food, water, and medical supplies. Heavy equipments like backhoes and front-end loaders are also being sent to help clear roads blocked by fallen power poles and trees. Local governments severely affected by the typhoon are appealing for immediate help to the national government and the private sector. They are hoping that building materials and temporary shelters would be sent immediately so that the residents wouldn't spend Christmas under the rain. Gretchen Malalad, CGTN, Manila.
Just weeks before the Beijing Winter Olympics, excitement is building in China. So is interest in many of the sports that will be showcased.
In southwest China, winters may be mild, but that hasn't stopped the city of Chengdu from making a name for itself in one ice sport. CGTN's Nicole Ng reports.
It might not be a sport you'd associate with China, let alone a city known for its hot summers and spicy food. But ice hockey is increasingly becoming a hobby of choice for young people in the city of Chengdu.
I've been playing for like 7 years almost.
So you started when you...
4. And I started skating when I was 3.
Teenagers like Lucas say it's fun inside the rink.
You just feel really happy to be out with your friends, like doing something you love to do. And then we'll always like stick up for each other and help each other whenever is needed. So that's why I feel really happy to have like this team.
These young people can train for up to 6 times a week for over an hour at a time. It's tiring and it's cold, but it hasn't stopped a surge in interest in ice hockey.
This year, Lucas's club was rewarded for its hard work, taking top honours in the national under-12s tournaments. Across the city, there are many clubs fostering young talents.
There are at least 8 or 9, and of course, through promotion work, the next step is to bring it to more districts, schools and communities.
The association has thousands of members, despite only having started up a few years ago. But Li Huarong says that doesn't come as a surprise to her.
In the beginning, it's ice skating they're usually interested in. They don't expect to see a puck, but we'll go and play. Because it's a team sport, not only do they learn how to win and lose, how to compete, as well as do physical exercise, they can also make a lot of friends. And that's where the happiness lies.
A new generation growing the sport's popularity and maybe even becoming future Winter Olympians. But for now, they're just happy to be out on the ice. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how New Zealand has enlisted a giant rubber whale and an artificial dolphin for important conservation work on its beaches.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. When South African scientists first identified the Omicron variant last month, the UK was quick to ban travel from a number of southern African countries. The EU, the United States and Canada all followed suit.
With the variant now present around the world, the UK lifted its ban last week, but others remain in place. Their impact has been devastating for South Africa's tourism sector. Angelo Coppola reports from Johannesburg.
According to the Tourism Business Council, the tourism sector lost $62.5 million in bookings alone in the first 48 hours following the ban. It doesn't end there.
The challenge that we sit with now is that we still have the EU, still banning South Africa. The likes of Germany are important, France is important for tourism, the Netherlands, and many other countries within the European Union. If you look at the European Union itself, 686,000 tourists come from the European Union. We still have the US that still have banned us. Luckily, we just got the news that Canada has lifted the ban on South Africa.
The hospitality sector was hard hit by that red listing.
If we take our December period, we lost about 45% of our business. Some of it has clawed back in fits and starts. And around about 65% of our January and February businesses. That's the short-term losses that were ring-fenced in terms of the international travel.
There's been some discussion about seeking compensation from the UK authorities for imposing that latest red listing.
So one of the things about our continent, about Africa, is how willing and how forgiving we are. We really shouldn't be. We should be as bold as to say we will sue them for loss compensation. We will try and get them to compensate us for the damage that is done. Because remember, it didn't just do financial damage, but it also had a reputational damage.
Industry players don't see any value in pursuing that option.
The issue of compensation takes years, and we can't wait for years to operate and go into courts and so forth and so on. For us, let's restore trust. Let's make sure that we work together. Let's put the red listing issues aside into the history books
I think there should be some consequences, but I think you've got 5 chances of getting a settlement. I think on this. This is a worldwide problem that we've got to deal with, and I think we're not going to get in. That doesn't make sense. Let's rather just try and rebuild and learn from the mistakes of doing knee-jerk reactions.
It's not about whether the tourists are back in the country or not. It's about the long-term damage that's been done to those tourism establishments and when they're going to recover and contribute meaningfully to the South African GDP. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The return of travel restrictions in some parts of the world has frustrated many holiday plans, but those who can travel are apparently looking for something a bit wacky, something out of the ordinary.
A survey by Confused.com found Google searches for different types of Airbnb were up 400% this year, and they don't come much more different than Mexico City. CGTN's Alistair Baverstock reports.
In the hills above Mexico City sits an architectural wonder with roots that can be traced back into this country's ancient history. Shaped like an enormous coiled snake, this building, El Nido de Quetzalcoatl, houses 10 different apartments, and today is also the country's most famous listing on the property rental site Airbnb. Patricia Castillo is the building's host, welcoming guests from around the world.
Wow. That's the reaction. They always say, wow, amazing, and they get amazed about the size, about the beauty. They say the photos are not fair for the place.
Designed by Mexican architect Javier Senosian, he took inspiration from another famous architect, Antoni Gaudí of Barcelona, who said originality consists in going back to the origins.
El Nido de Quetzalcoatl, or the nest of the plumed serpent, takes its inspiration from a deity of the cultures of ancient Mexico, a hybrid of a snake and the rare quetzal bird, an important god to the cultures that predated even the Aztecs.
The architect describes the building as bioarchitecture, as it seeks to blend with nature. For Airbnb guests, it's a unique experience.
It's like a very spiritual experience. I think like the group I'm traveling with and I, we keep having these moments where we're just overcome with emotion that we can't believe a place like this exists. It's very transcendent.
I feel very in touch with nature. I love that there's trees and birds, and I still can't believe it. It feels like a dream. It doesn't feel real.
It's part of a philosophy that, even in an urban setting, people can return to a more natural reality.
For example, the apartments, you won't see any corners because he says we should not live in a square space because we were creating a round wall for being the closest to the nature, to the first space where you were created.
A return to natural essence in one of the world's most densely populated urban areas. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Mexico City.
A New Zealand conservation group has enlisted 2 new members in its effort to rescue stranded animals. A giant rubber whale and a smaller dolphin dummy are being used to train the volunteers, whose task it is to refloat the pretend animals. New Zealand has one of the world's highest whale stranding rates. Around 300 animals beach themselves annually.
To have the logistical expertise to be able to look after people and whales is an absolute privilege. We have 4,500 trained marine mammal medics all over the country and ready to go when the next stranding happens in their region.
The headlines again. The UK Cabinet is meeting with scientists as COVID cases surge. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's expected to announce at a news conference shortly whether new restrictions will be introduced.
Our other headlines, the European Union's drug regulator has approved use of the Novovax COVID-19 vaccine for people over the age of 18.
And Chile has elected its youngest ever president, left-winger Gabriel Boric, defeating the far-right candidate in a resounding victory.
And that is it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com, the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.